keeps you from understanding the next step that comes in. Maybe just a little bit of some interesting statistics. In 2011, more than 28,000 reports of abuse, neglect, exploitation were received statewide. That is up a few thousands from the year before. So they go up every year a little bit. Not drastically, but consistently. Of those 28,000, 11,600 were assigned for investigation. As we'll talk about later a little bit, and I'm actually kind of going through the PowerPoint just because it flows, so we'll come across that as a slide. Once we receive a call of a report, we assess whether it is something that we will investigate or not. I mean, that kind of makes sense. So of those 28,000 cases, 11,600 were investigated. And of those 11,700, 2,935 were substantiated cases of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So that's about like what, a quarter of the cases that we investigated. I'm going to go into it a little bit later, but we investigate not only community cases, which is probably what you all are most likely going to be come in contact with, but also facility cases. The state licenses nursing homes, assisted living facilities, residential care facilities, adult foster homes. We license those. So as investigator, we come into two completely separate situations. One is investigate community abuse between, of seniors or people with disabilities, and the other is investigate a facility whether they're acting by the law and the rules. So very different types of abuse, but it's important to know that the state, and most of you probably did know, does make sure that every resident or is concerned about the safety of every resident in every facility that we have in the state. So let me see. In the community, financial exploitation cases were the most common cases. Self-neglect and financial exploitation are the most common cases of all of them. 40% of the cases we received, of the reports we received on financial exploitation were substantiated, which is higher than for most other kinds of abuse. So if you suspect financial exploitation, there is a higher risk of it being the case than suspecting anything else. And therefore very worthwhile to report it. About 6,000 cases were investigated in 2011. We had 2,100 self-neglect cases, and I'll talk a little bit about what the different types of abuse are. And who do you think are the most common identified abusers in substantiated cases? Family, friends, caregivers. I mean, family, of course, the most common, but that is the gang. That's the group, because those people also have the highest opportunity, and they are closest to the person. They know them best, and there really is so much opportunity. You kind of wonder, it's more surprising nearly how many people don't abuse. The opportunity is there. You have someone, you manage that person's money, and then a good apple goes bad. Somebody never thought they would exploit their parent, but the opportunity is there, and down that road they go, one penny at a time, and then the amounts get bigger and bigger. So let me go by the presentation. So our role basically is to provide protection and intervention for vulnerable adults. That's pretty. This is the group that we serve. The seniors, 65 years and older, and that's not, the person has to be 65 years old. But also younger adults, 18 and older, who are disabled. There are basically three kinds of disabilities. There are much more. But the way the state divided it, there's the physical disability, mental health disability, and developmental disability. We primarily deal with physical disabilities. If we get clients from the other two groups, there are actually state offices that deal with people with mental health problems or developmental disability, but only if those people are enrolled clients with them. So if a person has significant mental health problems, and there are a lot of people out there who are not enrolled with mental health, then we take them on, they are part of our client base also. Okay. Those are the different types of abuse, and we'll go through each of them. Abandonment, financial exploitation, neglect, physical abuse, emotional, verbal, involuntary seclusion. Which one of you mentioned a case where a senior, where they were told that who was it?
I was.
Oh yeah, that was you, exactly. And that would absolutely be a case of abuse that we would investigate, if somebody says that. Wrongful use of a physical or chemical restraint, sexual abuse, and self-neglect. Physical and sexual abuse is the most rare. I would say in my 5-6 years in that work, I personally had only one case. It ended up unsubstantiated. You find it in facilities every once in a while, at least allegations, but often there the victims are the most nonverbal ones. So it is the most difficult kind to pursue, but they are very rare. Doesn't mean there are more out there. So we have to keep our eyes peeled for everything, even though it's fairly uncommon. Physical abuse is fairly uncommon, luckily too, but it's not, it's more common than sexual abuse. All right. So abandonment is basically if somebody has assumed responsibility for the care of a person and leaves them alone and then something happens. So we had the situation where the wife was taking care of her husband who had moderate dementia. And they were bickering all their life, that was just their lifestyle. And so they were still bickering. And then add to that dementia. So my heart goes out to the wife or to anyone who takes care of dementia. But one day she had enough. She told him, I'm leaving, I'm going to Las Vegas, I'll be back in a week. And she left him. In this case, nothing happened. But if something had happened to him, she could have been charged with neglect. And in under our category, it's also abandonment. So abandonment would be an example for that kind of abuse.
Can you go a little bit into it? Assumed, is there a legal aspect of that? Is it assumed that a spouse is being...
And I have to say, I don't know to what extent the law reflects it the same way as the state does. What we have, for example, you have a senior homebound. The neighbor decided, I'm going to bring you lunch every day. Not even a real verbal decision, just it kind of happened. And then one day, after several months, the neighbor decides to go on vacation, and it was the senior's only meal, and the senior deteriorates. That's abandonment. There is an assumed level of taking care. It doesn't have to be formal in any way. It can be informal, but it is the assumption, I will do that now. That's like an unspoken word. That's sufficient, at least for us to come in. It may be sufficient for law enforcement, but I never had to test that. But good question.
One related question.
Go ahead.
So when you come in, do you have an administrative code or something that sets the rules?
We do,
Yeah.
but we don't bring it along. I mean, everything in there is based in Oregon statute.
Yeah. Okay.
So we wouldn't do anything that isn't. But very few people ask us, so I don't carry it around. But I could produce it.
So it's more of a moral, sort of fair play, treat somebody well kind of standard.
You mean in regards to the assumed responsibility?
Yeah.
there is a code that says if there is assumption of responsibility and something bad happens, then we got a problem.
I got you.
Yeah, so it really is in code.
Okay.
Maybe I just didn't quite.
Yeah, and maybe I just wasn't clear on
Good enough.
what I wanted to ask, but I just had this sense of,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Well,
So
thank
what
you.
happens to that
You're welcome.
individual? I think maybe that's the question. So you've got your case in point. You've got a neighbor who's being very nice, but, you're going to go off to Costa Rica for a couple of weeks and doesn't think any more about it. What kind, if you're saying the police wouldn't necessarily, or the law would say that I have this official responsibility, what does your department do? I mean,
Okay,
that's
okay.
kind
Law enforcement, depending on the severity, we call law enforcement. We absolutely do. And law enforcement, I am very sure, will follow suit also, because at the hands of someone else, or at the lack of someone else's hands, something happened. We primarily, we intervene. We make sure that the person is safe for right now, even though the other person is gone. And we talk to the other person and make sure that whether that other person wants to stay the caregiver now that they're back, or make sure that they're on the right track with it. We're not out to get people in trouble. We work with the police in a heartbeat, but we're not out to get people in trouble. We're out to understand the dynamic of the situation and to fix it, or at least to help the senior to fix it, because what we have to remember is that the senior has a right to say no. And that is the biggest challenge in adult protective services. We basically have the man, but our role is to keep vulnerable people safe. At the same time, the same people who are vulnerable can say, no, thank you. So it is, it's an unusual kind of situation that you really end up walking the line with, you have to balance. To what extent you have to balance the rights of the individual and what you would like to see. Okay, emotional verbal abuse, pretty much self-explanatory. And that is continued. You have that in your paperwork, so we're not going to go through it. And indicators, each of the abuse types, most of them have indicators. If you suspect any of those, look through your notes and just check for them. We're not going to go through them. Okay? Financial exploitation. The illegal or improper use of another person's resources, which also includes their medication. So if the son or grandson goes into grandma's medicine cabinet and takes mom's grandmother's Vicodin, oxycodone, which is so common. That is financial exploitation. Law enforcement will take this in a heartbeat. They will come in immediately. That is what they really, really are set on not having happen. I had one case where the caregivers were taking the patients. He was married, but she wasn't much involved in the care. She was very functional, and he had MS, advanced MS, and the caregiver was taking the medication. And because they had around-the-clock caregivers, there were like a lot of them, coming in and out, and they had no idea who it was. They had a pretty good sense. So law enforcement set up a camera in the house with the agreement, of course, of the family, and that's how they found who took it. They go all out to find medication theft. Financial exploitation by, so often by means of deceit, coercion, undue influence, and fraud. So often you have a person with dementia, family member, caregiver, friend comes in, oh, let me be your power of attorney, let's go to the bank, open a bank account together. The bank may be the one calling us and saying, we just had a funny interaction right in front of our counter. Just wanted to let you know. And the moment we get a report from the bank has the right to give us all bank documents that we request. If the bank makes a report, it absolves them from the privacy law in a reasonable manner. If we want information from a bank, there is a statute that tells the bank that they may waive the privacy requirements, but it is in the end up to the bank whether they do or not. But they are legally permitted to waive it. So we can get in, and we just, so failure of a person's fund. So let's say you have someone who is a Social Security representative payee for somebody. If that money that the abuser or the perpetrator receives in their name is not spent 100% in the person's best interest, you can consider it financial exploitation. I mean, we normally don't come in unless it's bigger amounts, but that is a very easy situation for financial exploitation to happen if someone took over the caretaking. Okay. Indicators, and actually you may want to read through that on your own, because if you deal with people in their homes, read through the indicators of all of the abuse types. I just may not have enough time to go through them, so I'm not going to do it right now. The victim, let me go further. We may go back to that,
Okay.
because this is so common. I just want to make sure I get through everything. Neglect, pretty easy. The failure of a caretaker to provide basic needs, to protect a vulnerable person from abuse. That's a very broad statement. There comes the point, so I don't think I have a slide on that, but once we get a report of abuse, we have to decide, is this a case we want to investigate or not? Let's say we get an allegation of neglect. The question arises, at what point of information that we get do we come in, and at what point do we not come in? We get calls for people saying, there is a person and there are just all the symptoms of something going wrong soon. It's just not right. She can't think straight, she does this, that, and the other. The yard looks disheveled. There are all kinds of people going in and out of her house. We need you to come in. And here comes the biggest problem. We cannot come in preventatively. In order for Adult Protective Services to enter the picture, something has to have happened, which is frustrating. Because of course you wished in many cases you could go in, do an assessment, provide support services if the person accepts them, and then just kind of fix the situation. But we can't. If we went in before something had happened, we would start becoming preventative, and for that we would need probably twice the amount of staff. Not only double, but more than that, because prevention goes out like this versus abuse is just this amount. So with neglect, it's one of those cases where something has to have happened or be very imminent. Let's say the person, be very imminent, whatever, you just think by the end of the day it may happen.
Right. We had one case where the sale of the house was being pressured by a family member, and the person had, offered to sign over the money, a large amount of the money to her, and they hadn't signed the papers, right? It wasn't that, it was something like that. So, but it was imminent. It was in writing. And the body called APS.
And that is the financial exploitation case. That is often easier, especially, imminent, because nothing had happened yet.
Right, but it was in writing.
Was about to happen, absolutely. Okay. Indicators of neglect. Go ahead, read through those on your own. Physical abuse, pretty straightforward also. Indicators of physical abuse. Of course, you have the physical indicators on the body. We sometimes come in quickly if there are marks or bruises, because we want to preserve the evidence as far as taking photos of it. In physical abuse cases with marks or bruises, law enforcement always gets called. Just, I mean, I can't imagine. There could be a case when there is a lot of suspicion that the person may not have fallen, or was an accidental kind of situation. But normally we call law enforcement in a heartbeat. Let's do the next one. Involuntary seclusion of an elderly is either for the convenience of the caregiver to discipline the person or to groom that person for future abuse, meaning for financial exploitation, and mostly it's for financial exploitation. You take care of an elderly person or a person who is vulnerable in some form, and I lost my train of thought. So you take care of them, kind of forbid them having contact with others in order to groom them, to get them ready for what you're going to do later. Or you've been doing it all along, and now you just kind of want to keep doing what you've been doing without anybody noticing it. Yeah? So definition would be confinement or restriction of an adult to his or her room or specific area, or placing restrictions on that person's association, communication with other people, and often it's family members or a close friend is the first one who notices, hey, I'm not hearing, I can't talk to them anymore. If we get a call like that, we need more than just saying, so-and-so doesn't let me talk to her anymore. We need just a little bit more. But it raises a very, very red flag.
What would you need? I mean, there have been these cases where a nurse or a girlfriend, a couple take this elderly gentleman, and all of a sudden the family is left out in the cold, and they're milking him for all his money. What can a family do, or what could we do?
You just gave it to me, what I needed, because I need more history. I need a little bit of history of this is unusual kind of thing. If somebody says, I'm trying to reach so-and-so, and so-and-so doesn't let me talk to them, then I'm just going to make a few more, I'm going to call a little bit more. What's your relationship? What has happened? I may even, give them a call and kind of find out. Normally, we always come in without telling people that we're there. We're unannounced. That is really the name of the game. I would say 99% of the cases. There are cases where there is domestic violence of any kind, or where the alleged victim may be afraid of the consequences of the family member. If we show up, we don't show up then. Then we try to get in touch with the alleged victim and see if we can meet them outside of the house somewhere. Because the very first thing in our interaction and intervention is don't do any more harm. If our intervention causes any harm that we know of, then we will do everything we can to avoid it and still get to the senior or the vulnerable person. But normally we come in unannounced, and what always puzzles me and what always amazes me is the generation we're dealing with, the people, just a few years older, maybe 10, 20 years older than me, come from a time where there is so much trustworthiness towards the world around. You come to a senior, they open the door, you say, you're from there and there, could I come in and talk with you? You're in. You're in. That wouldn't happen to me, if somebody came to my door. So, in a way it is so wonderful to see, but it's also scary, because that is the same trustworthiness that makes seniors vulnerable to people's bad intention. So, but going back to that, we always come in unannounced, and if we come into a home and the person who may or may not be the perpetrator says, no, you can't see him or her, then we actually have the right to come in with law enforcement. And that is the nice thing. Very rarely. I had to use it once in all those years. Normally, often, if you tell a person, if you don't let me in, I have to call law enforcement, they let you in. which is a good thing, because you don't necessarily want to up the ante and make anything more tense. Going a little bit into that situation, just, a couple of things that come to mind just about this work in general. You get a report of concern, and you kind of have it all laid out. That's the bad guy, that's the good guy, we're gonna go in, we're gonna go fix it. It's kind of human, you get that report, you go in with that. 98% of the cases, the story is different. And I love it. It's like a movie. You know exactly what's gonna happen. Well, not all movies, but some movies. And it's turning out different. So it's like a ride. You go through it and things unfold, and it is all different in the end. The bad guy, even if they're bad, most of the time, there is much more shading there between good and bad. You see the challenges, you see the difficulties, you see where they went wrong, you see what happened. There are very few evil people out there. There are often relationships out there that have been going wrong for a long, long time. As long as the senior has capacity, mental capacity, they are an equal player in that game, and life is okay. Once that senior, let's assume senior, the vulnerable person, it could be an adult, 40 years old, having other kind of mental health issues that falls under our category. As soon as that person loses ground, we have an unequal balance. And then, we come in and kind of say, this has to change. Not that we can make it change. We can't necessarily. We need agreement from the client, from the situation, and family members. But it's interesting that a situation that has been going for a certain while suddenly, and to catch that moment, to catch that moment when things are not right anymore. So, going a little astray on that. So, involuntary seclusion, let's do the next one. Wrongful use of a restraint. We come across it sometimes in facilities. If I'm thinking this is used in homes, and in homes especially much, much more often, where you give grandma a pill to make her quiet, to keep her out of your hair, There is a very small line between giving grandma that pill to keep herself safe for her own sake, or to keep her safe for your sake, or so that you don't have to watch her, or that she sleeps through the night so that you can go out, So that is the restraint. We don't come across it a lot. Sometimes as a side effect of another case that comes out. In facilities, every once in a while, but there are situations when restraints are legal, and there are actually slides on that. So facilities must either have a doctor's order or to prevent imminent harm, and then it's not a restraint that stays in place at any time, for any time, and then there's a third reason too, but you have it here. Permissible use of restraint, licensed physician prescribed. It's a treatment, it's part of a treatment plan, you hope, of a licensed physician, and in connection with a court order. And then my third one is imminent harm, but, indicators of, and this do any of you deal with caregivers? I mean, one of you is a caregiver. Do any of you have caregivers that the person has a caregiver in the home?
Well, I know the case I had with a spouse was a caregiver and was doing this sort of thing, refusing to talk to the caseworker, accusing me of being in cahoots with the caseworker, and not letting me talk directly to the client. And I didn't call APS on it, was Washington County, as a matter of fact, because it was done, okay, I wasn't aware of this sort of a possibility.
And also, if it is between spouses, it's sometimes different, because it often doesn't come from nowhere. It may be that the spouse says, I don't want anybody to mess with my taking care of my wife. This is my situation. I don't want them to send someone in either because I want to take care of her, or because I don't want to spend the money on caregivers. which could be a problem, but there is no bad intent towards the wife. So, but there could be situations where the spouse, I had one case where the spouse tried to, according to the allegation, is continuing to try to kill her husband. But the husband has capacity, has mental capacity, and could get him or herself, himself, out of the situation and hasn't done so. So it's kind of like, a situation like that. But every indicator is that she's trying to kill him, except we don't have anything on her.
In this case, it was a little weird. The caregiving spouse was diagnosed with bipolar. And when they were in the manic aggressive part, they didn't want to see us. When they were quiet, it was a whole different story. It was a little weird.
Yeah, life is so much more complex than many of the cases we kind of imagine or outline even in examples. There are so many more flavors and colors in there. Okay, indicators of problematic caregiver behavior. You want to read through those. Whether you deal with caregivers at this point in time or not, because you may at some point. And the caregiver could be a spouse, and some of it might apply. It could be a friend or a neighbor. Be aware of those. They are good to know. Sexual abuse, pretty clear cut. Sexual harassment. Let's go back to one kind. Let's go. Oh, you don't need to. Sexual harassment is one. Have I come across that? Yeah, it wasn't in bad intent. It was just very inappropriate. Exposure. Sometimes you hear about it in a facility, but not a lot. Not a lot. Indicators of sexual abuse. Let's go to the next one. Self-neglect. Now, self-neglect is a very common one, and very often happens with people whose cognition is slowly declining, or people who have mental health problems. The most common ones are where the cognition is declining, and self-neglect is the most difficult of the cases to address, because in the state of Oregon, people have the right to decline services until the court says you don't have it anymore. So theoretically, a person who is very, very far gone, theoretically I'm saying, has the right to make their own decisions unless the court says you cannot make your own decisions anymore. That doesn't mean that we leave the home and let them be, if they are very, very far declined. And I'll talk a little bit about what we can do, but in the beginning, where you know things are not going right, where you know some things have happened already, maybe not life-threatening, but they have happened. If the person says, leave me alone, we leave. We cannot do anything in regard to that person. There are a few options we have. One is, and that's one that I always find very important, and others do too, is make sure that if you leave the case, you have somebody who keeps eyes on the situation, somebody who can call you when it gets worse, which is a neighbor, a friend, a family member, the Meals on Wheels person, somebody there who can lay eyes on them and let us know as things decline. The other thing we do in higher risk cases is we keep the case open and we keep going out. Just checking, just saying hi, And most of the time, the senior likes seeing us. Every once in a while, dementia can bring with it the fear of other people or defensiveness, and then it's more difficult to establish a relationship. But most of the time, it works just well. I had one case where it took me, I think, over a year and a half, before that person had declined to the point that she actually said herself, I'm ready for home. But we had to wait. We had to basically wait and stand there until that happens. So to that extent, self-neglect is frustrating. It's frustrating for the community who says, but you see what's going on? Why don't you do anything about it? You know, and we're the same way. Because the state because the individual has the right for self-determination.
I wanted to ask you.
Go ahead, I'll just take her first. You didn't see it yet.
Can you initiate services, like if they are not taking out their trash or they're living in a disgusting apartment, can you initiate services that have come in and help them get control of their environment?
If the person agrees with it, absolutely.
So you can suggest it and start it if they're.
We will suggest all kinds of services to them. And then they will say no, no, no. And then, you know, we suggest them the next time around. And this is the interesting thing too. If we get a call and say, this person is very, very dirty, the house has garbage up to the ceiling, there are rats, we don't normally react to that. If there is no negative outcome, because that is just, it doesn't say anything about the person being harming themselves. If you tell me that person is going out at night into the street and running into traffic, then we have a different story. But the mere fact that it's dirty, or the person is dirty, doesn't tell me anything. If we have a person, you know, and it's, sometimes you say we have a person, the bank calls, he comes every day and is soiled and confused, you know, then we may not even go out yet. We don't have a negative outcome. But we are there to hear as soon as something happens. You know, it's that fine, fine line. Okay, here comes another part to the picture. When we get a report of concern, we keep a file of it. Every call is logged. If we get a call on someone and we decide we're not going out on them, and then we get more and more and more calls, and it gets worse and worse and worse, then a situation like the example I just gave you may rise to the occasion where we say, okay, we go in. You know, so it builds itself a case. If we have that if we have that report by itself, we say, is there any other erratic behavior? You know, no, otherwise he's fine. Because what we have is we have people with alcohol problems, and then they live a lifestyle like that. We really can't do much with alcohol problems, you know. I mean, it's a person's choice. With alcohol, we often have to conclude it's a person's choice. Because if you tell an alcohol person, a person who is addicted to alcohol, I can provide you this, that, and the other service, I mean, we will do that, you know, if we get to talk with them, they're most likely going to decline. So that is where the self-neglect is just a very difficult field. A is, when do you come in? B is, what do you do if you can't get anywhere? So that's where we pull out all our skills that we have and do the best and hope for the best. Go ahead. You go ahead.
So I'm wondering, are you saying then, when in doubt, call APS?
Absolutely.
And that's a question I have, because I've come into several situations recently in my Meals on Wheels position where I've just had a spate of really bad situations that I've viewed, and from someone who seems totally rational, ex-alcohol and drug counselor chatting away, and you look around the room and you see it's filled with rotting food, and the pizza box on the walker falls over, and ants just swarm, and things of that nature. And you think, well, he sounds perfectly rational, logical, you know, carrying on a conversation, and the room was darkened or I would have seen it immediately. There wasn't a smell, but.
Interesting.
So then do you begin the process by starting a file on that person, by calling to say?
And I'm glad you asked that, because I would say, if in doubt, definitely call. Call 10 times too often, but not 1 time too little.
Okay.
Because each time that you call, we have that person in our database, and we keep track of it. We may have 8 cases where we don't go out on it. But slowly a picture starts evolving. Maybe different people call in and we end up getting different persons that are part of that person's life that we can talk with, that are resources in some form. So absolutely, don't even hesitate. Go ahead.
That was my question.
Oh, so yeah. Was it
That
your
was it.
question? Okay,
Okay.
good. I'm glad you asked that.
So in the circumstance where you're Meals on Wheels or something like that, is the driver, is it better to go through Meals on Wheels or go directly to you guys, or is there?
Well, at Meals on Wheels, I work for Meals on
Yeah.
Wheels, but I'm also a volunteer driver. And we train the drivers to contact the client service coordinator because I'm a client service coordinator. We have a responsibility for a base of people that, we had an individual who our drivers were saying, he's not feeling well and he's not able to get up off the couch. And I didn't worry about it for a few days, but after about 3 or 4 days, the driver said, he hasn't been up off the couch in 4 days. You need to go take a look at him. And I did, and it turned out he'd been on this couch for over a week, wasn't able to get up. Diabetes, had lost the toes on one foot and part of a leg on the other, and was too far away from his walker to even attempt to stand up, but had no water. His phone charger was in the other room, and his cell phone was dead.
So that's
and who knows what was going on with his diabetes at
Yep.
that point.
That would
And-
definitely be a case where we would intervene, So
Yeah.
go through your chain of commands at
Yeah.
wherever you are at, and then either you or anyone else can call us. But if your supervisor requires you, inform
Yeah.
them. But you can call us too and let us know.
Yeah.
And just to address, as a personal advocate, you're always welcome to call APS directly. I wouldn't mind knowing it, because they may call Elders in Action to ask for a report, but just because we're easier to get a hold of maybe than you are, but you're always welcome to call them directly. How often do you then refer, like for a more of a welfare check kind of thing? No?
We don't do any welfare checks because welfare check would fall under prevention.
But do you ever like send it over to Adult Aging Disability Services or DABS in Washington County and say, hey, I think this person could use a well check?
We do. Normally welfare checks, we haven't used them like that. As far as welfare checks are concerned, it's mostly with very concrete services. Welfare check, you can also call law enforcement to do welfare checks.
Right, you can.
And they are really good, they go immediately, they're very good about that.
And in Multnomah County, the helpline will arrange a well
Nice.
check.
Very nice. Okay. Let's do indicators, let's skip it. Indicators. Actually, you may want to read those. Again, here I just saw in the previous one, animal infested facility. In and of itself, that's not enough for us. But because some people really, with full capacity, just live like that. So life is very, I heard some very interesting stories from a trainer. But I'm not gonna go there. So informed choice, very, very important slides. Adults have the right to make informed choices that do not conform to societal norms. Exactly what I just said as far as being able, some people living, in very different circumstances. As long as those decisions are not harmful to others, and we don't really worry about the others, that would be law enforcement or, other state departments.
So what you're saying is, I happen to know an elder lady that's isolated in her bedroom in the house. And if there's a fire, there's no way that she can get out of there.
We don't, and that would fall
But
under.
that's fine with her.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, and that's, if she has capacity, she can live in the attic and play with matches. Yeah, and that sounds cool. But I'm not just being funny, But if she has capacity, then a person chooses to do that, What you can always do in some communities, the fire department will come and talk to people. But they can't really make people do anything either.
They can't get in the front door.
Say it again.
They can't get in the front door.
if she has capacity, she can choose to live in the most unusual circumstances. And of course, the trick comes to make sure that somebody notices when she loses capacity, if she ever loses capacity. You know, if there is a decline in capacity, then the image changes. Then the picture changes, and we start having concerns.
So who determines loss of capacity? That's a,
Got to get her out to the doctor.
Really, the doctor is the only one. But when we come in and we realize that the person basically cannot understand the consequences of their actions by our layman's assessment, then it's good enough for us. Then we start. We still cannot make him do anything. We cannot. But we can do a more intense, we can first of all get into the case, open it up as an investigation, and do a more intense work with the family and the person themselves. Okay, APS process. I'm just going to go through it shortly. Screening is when someone calls in and we take the report. Triage. Go ahead, actually, let me go through it because I have a slide for each of them.
Okay.
So we have screening, triage, assessment, investigation, intervention. And that's pretty much where the slide stops, so go ahead. So screening is when we determine, is it adult protective services material? And then many of the calls, more often than not, people just need to be connected with somebody else who might be able to help in that situation. And often it could be solved by the Medicaid case manager if there is a case manager involved. Response time frames, imminent, if we want to prevent further harm right now, or if there is evidence that needs to be preserved. The next one requires a response. 90% of our cases are next day cases. And then problematic is there is an issue. 5 working days is the longest that we can wait before we go out. And that really is, like it says, in chronic and stable conditions for something, just needs help. Assessment, we assess the client's mental capacity just by our interaction, not in any formal or legal way, because like you said, only the doctor can do that. By checking, is the client able to protect himself or her own interests? And is there a support system available? And the investigation just checks, what is the abuse, why did it happen? And then comes the intervention. Go ahead, and that is for the investigation. The intervention is doing what we can do to fix the situation or stabilize it. The services end when the problem either has been resolved or there is a plan in place that will help resolve the problem in the near future, or the person refuses to work with us. We normally close it out pretty quickly unless we have a very concerning self-neglect case. Then we keep it open and monitor it and kind of stay a little bit in that person's life. Don't want to go much into that. Facility and community investigations are different. None of you really work much in facilities, so read it in your handouts. Facility APS interventions. Our interventions and the kinds of things that we can do when we go into a case are to refer to other services, to refer a person maybe for Medicaid so that they can get state assistance, mediation, to just sit down and help solve problems if there are family problems that are not long standing or misunderstandings. We can help people with relocating, let's say, from their own home into a facility. We can initiate, we can assist with power of attorney if they say, I have a person I trust, I would like to be my power of attorney. That person I trust more than the person who has been financially exploiting me.
I'm a notary, and I do power of attorney. And I am obligated to make sure that the person that I'm handling the power of attorney, handing it to, and that the person who's giving it are stable and the person who's giving it knows what they're doing. If I cannot establish that that person understands what's happening, I don't do the notarizing.
Thank you, because I see so many powers of attorney that should never have happened.
Yeah, and what the people do in the family, if it's a touchy one, they'll try to find somebody they know, maybe it's at their bank, not the person's bank, you know, or something like that, and the banks are not good about that. They just pull it out
Rubber
and do
stamp
it.
it.
But when I get calls for that, if the person is appearing to be incompetent or not understanding what's going on, I don't do it. And if they look really incompetent, I will refer it, have the crisis team go by or do something like that.
Very good, very good. Realistically, what will happen is the person with bad intent will go notary shopping.
Yeah,
They'll go shop, you know, like you said.
they
they'll go
do that, and
shopping.
that's how you get the incompetent
Yes.
people signing away their rights.
Absolutely, but I'm so glad you say that, I'm so glad, you know, that that you have that ethical,
Well,
that awareness.
Yeah. If you're finding a power of attorney, you know, for somebody, it's better not to just tell them to go to the son's bank or something like that. It's better to check with the Notary Association, and we charge $10. And if the person's indigent, well, when I'm working with this agency, I don't charge them anything.
Yeah. The thing is, I mean, if we identify one and the person is safe, you know, is okay with that, then most
Yeah.
likely they're present well to the notary too, even if they pull the wool over our eyes.
Yeah.
But, you know, they'll present well anyways. But it often happens, like, without anyone watching.
Right.
Then, so,
Right.
oh, you know, come, I can be your power of attorney and I'll take care of all your bills.
Yeah.
You know, the rest of the story.
Isn't that a general caution to us as volunteers? You're in a situation and Sonny says, oh, I'll take care of grandma's credit card and do these things. And we sort of say, well, okay, that helps, but it of course does not. I think the sense of when in doubt, don't, and
Yeah.
double check comes in there.
Thank you. Very good point. Very good point. I think this presentation will also help you become more aware of family dynamics, of what's going on in the family, you know, is there anything fishy going on? Very often though, if you have a dysfunctional family dynamic, they kind of want to get the volunteers out of the picture, you know, so that they can operate without anybody out there. But still, it'll be interesting now to see the world maybe with more suspicious eyes. I'm sorry. Assistance with relocation, we can help people, power of attorney, we did that. Assistance with obtaining a restraining order. Restraining orders for seniors are very easy to get, very easy. If you need more information, give me a call.
Terry and Will are both trained in that, and we have
Okay.
a handful of other volunteers, so yeah.
Very, very good.
Bringing that up, there's a situation I got into where the client wanted a restraining order against someone who was giving them in-home light housekeeping services. And I looked at it and felt that this was actually the client trying to abuse the caregiver and looked at other things.
Life is much more colorful than we imagine.
Because when we go in, our reputation, our trustworthiness is part of the judge giving a restraining order, and we don't want to abuse that trust.
Absolutely, absolutely. You take the judge aside and say, Judge, really?
Yeah.
That's not it. Guardianship conservatorship, we do not take guardianship conservatorship. We can assist with the process. There is another slide on that later, but let me go into that. The nice thing with the role of Child Protective Services is they can go in and in an emergency, take emergency guardianship over a child. With seniors, this is not possible. This does not exist. Oh, by the way, just as it enters my mind, Oregon is the state in the nation that leaves the individual the most rights. Oregonians have, by statute, more rights than any other citizens in other states. So, which is a good thing, unless, of course, sometimes you wished it was different. You know, but overall, for each of us, it's a good thing. So, guardianship, we cannot take guardianship over anybody. We often I want to use the right word, not often, but, often come across situations where we said, it would be great if that person had a guardian. I think that person would qualify for guardianship as far as their mental capacity goes, as far as their need goes. But here comes the big but. Guardianship in this, outside of Multnomah County, guardianship has to be paid for. And many of the people don't have the money to pay for guardianship. Many of the people are on Medicaid, are very, who need a guardian, cannot pay for it. So that takes it completely off the table. Multnomah County has public guardianship program. We only have private.
Frequently, Multnomah County is full.
Yeah, I don't blame them. That is a wonderful service. And actually, Washington County is looking at getting a private, public guardianship program in place.
I saw something about the city looking into expanding so there would be more guardianships available in Multnomah, in Portland, in Multnomah County.
It's probably.
But they haven't done it yet.
Yep, it's probably a county business. I'm thinking, but I haven't heard the last of it.
I heard that the long-term care ombudsman office was going to.
So there's a bill in the legislature right now
legislature.
that
Nice.
is considering having it be in the
Thank you.
ombudsman office, and it's a pilot, and though it would be statewide, but it's a pilot.
Nice. That would be
Very nice.
wonderful for the
Yes.
future.
Yes, absolutely. So guardianship is something we can help initiate it. If we have a person and all the pieces fit in there, we have the capacity that's lacking, we have the need for a guardian and or conservator, we can help initiate it. But the person has to have money. And then, or it doesn't have to be cash, but it has to be, assets in some form. Then we can initiate it. We can help with it. Commitment, referral to mental health. We have done that before. Or if the victim refuses services, there are no interventions, if the victim has capacity. What we don't do is we don't diagnose medical conditions. And to be sure, we don't diagnose if a person has capacity or not, but we make an assessment as to when we feel that our services are necessary in a situation. The real diagnosis comes only from a mental health provider. We don't make decisions for a victim who has capacity. We give them options and they make their own choices. We don't conduct criminal investigations and we don't take an adult into protective custody. Mandated reporters, let's skip that. There's the next slide also, and that one too. You may want to look through them.
I guess lawyers just came up on here too. That was a new legislation. And I think it started in July, which I see as a really great thing, because a lot of people go to elder law attorneys and maybe they're going with someone who's having them fill out their will in a way that's coercive, so it's huge.
Would the people that are doing this work for Elders in Action be mandated?
No.
No.
But if you tell me, I am.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
As soon as you tell me, I have to tell.
You can mandate your volunteers.
I know, as a volunteer, I don't think we can, mandate you, but generally, we pass on the information, right, what we see.
Yeah.
And are so glad that APS is there to
Yeah,
investigate.
to take the call. Just something interesting. Those folks who are mandated to protect child abuse, suspicions of child abuse, are mandated to do so 24 hours a day, meaning whether they're on or off work. People who are mandated to report suspected elder abuse or neglect are only mandated during their working hours. Just kind of an interesting aside. Yes.
So that didn't change with them, okay. Interesting, it's interesting.
Confidentiality, very important. Reporter stays confidential. You have the option of reporting anonymously. The drawback of reporting anonymously is if we want to call you back and ask a question, then we cannot do so. Confidential means we will not release it to the public. Once we report it to law enforcement, this case, the name of the reporter becomes public information, or once it goes to court. So there is this little risk in there. Also, sometimes the client may guess who the reporter is, but we will not say yes it is or it isn't. And
So-
I know we can skip the
Does that mean that if you make a referral or whatever, and then it ends up going to court, you could be called in to?
Yes, but if the judge will try everything he can or she can to keep the reporter confidential, either by having a separate session or so there are many protections in place for that. I think the rest we can kind of potential, nope. And that's our numbers. So, Central Oregon, bad girl.
Is
Bad
there a
girl.
new one?
That was when I was working in Bend, so I had to slide. Bad. So, but you have my number. You can call me. Good. Yes, it's on the back.
And I have the numbers for all of the APS for each county.
Yes.
On top of my phone, so if you ever need them, just let me know.
Good. All right, thank you much.
Yeah, thanks for coming and taking questions. Let's take a 10-minute break. There's only one key for the restrooms, but I think you've seen it by the door, and it's the same key for men and women, and they're just out